Tomás Mar here on Tallaght through the ages. Tallaght has come on an awful lot all down through the years, and what very few people realise is we're all much more familiar with its recent history, whereas in fact the history of the area goes many, many thousands of years back. One of the most historic places in the Glen of the Flocks. If I remember correctly.
The
Plain of the Flocks. And after it's all over, we'll all get the flock out of here. We're walking up to that indeed. Anyway, it was a great win with the boys in green last night. There's 2 more matches to be played there before we qualify for Russia. And at the moment, just to let you know, Martin O'Neill is consulting with Anne to make sure there's no clash between our lectures and any of the games are. Lots of connections with Tallaght going back through history and going way out into the Orient and out into the East, because we have great connections going back to Iran and that kind of area of the world through the Eye of Tallaght. Have you ever heard of him, the Eye of Tallaght? The Taliban. Now, just 1 or 2 bits of housekeeping. If you put your phone, you just put your phones on silent, please. In the event of an alarm or any situation you have to leave the building, just follow myself and Anne up the stairs. You come in just through out the door and away to the left, or away here to the right hand side. Either way, we'll all just follow Anne and we'll all be okay. So without further ado, I give you Tomás.
Okay, so tonight I'm going to give you just a general rundown on the history of Tallaght. Can everyone hear me? So anyway, the history of Tallaght, both written history and we say the mythological or pseudo-history, goes back a long, long way. So the name Tallaght in Irish means a plague grave, and the plague grave is connected with the history of the people of Parthalon. Now, Parthalon was, in the mythology, was a Greek prince who lived in a small kingdom in Greece. He had several brothers, some of them were older than he, so he wanted to gain the kingdom, so he decided he would murder his mother and father to try and gain the kingdom. And of course, in the end, he was unsuccessful. He had to take to his ships with his family, which was quite a big family, and go across the Mediterranean, and eventually ended up landing in the Kenmare River. This is all written down in the Lower Gaul, the Book of Invasions. And then he made his way up across the country, eventually with his followers, and they fought many battles. They eventually settled down in a place between here and Dublin, called Shan Law Nalta, the old plain of the flocks. Of course, Parthalon passed on. He died after a few hundred years as people had multiplied into their thousands, and they were struck by a terrible plague. So they're meant to be buried in the plague grave of the people of Parthalon, Taimleach Muintire Parthalon, and nobody knows where that plague grave is. So it's basically just a story. There are graves on the top of Tallaght Hill, which is west of here, about 5 kilometres west of here, and there are other graves, or there were, in the area where Taimleach Park is now. But to say that story is very much the pseudo history. The real history begins really with the settlement of Maelruain's monastery. And what you have on this slide here is a picture of the monastic site as it is today. So we have St. Maelruain's church and the tower attached to it, and the only remains of the ancient monastery that can be seen to this day is the fosse, what's called the fosse, the monastic enclosure. So this would have been, what you see there, part of a circle, was once a complete circle, and the road seems to delineate the other side of the circle, so just use your imagination. It went around like that, and the monastery was built out of wood for the most part, so it has all rotted away over time, but this still remains. So it's not very much given prominence, you could say, not given very much prominence. A lot of modern buildings around about it, and I'll just show you what it looks like today at ground level in the enclosure. Might have looked like, I'm sure you've all seen something like this. So you have a ditch, a foss built around it out of clay and stones, a small wooden church somewhere in the centre, and the beehive huts of the monks, more than likely built out of wattle and daub, like willow branches and that kind of thing. Sometimes they had gardens inside the enclosure, and then they would have had fields. Monks had lots of land around about to graze their animals and that. And of course you had to have a source of water quite close by as well. So this is the foss at ground level, more or less as it looks today, except it's a winter picture, so you can see no leaves about, so it's all very much overgrown now. And this is St. John's House on the High Street in the village. If you go out the back of that, out by Smith's Toy Shop, out the back of Smith's Toy Shop, actually you see this, and there's a little plaque on it over here saying it's a national monument, but it's not given very much respect. You'll find cars parked all around it if you go around the back nowadays. So that's part of the circle I showed you there a minute ago, the aerial shot. So this is Maelruain's church as it stands today. The tower is the oldest part of the building, and the church behind it with the spires was opened in 1829. Now, St. Maelruain came there himself in 774 or thereabouts. He was given the land by a local king. Can everyone hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So there were lots of small kingdoms in Ireland at that time, and Maelruain was given this land by the local king Dominicans. And he didn't know whether to accept the land. He was part of a reformist movement, and a lot of the great monasteries had become very wealthy and somewhat corrupt by the 8th century. So Maelruain was part of a reformist movement called the Céilí Day. They were trying to go back to basics and had quite a severe rule in their monasteries. So Maelruain didn't know whether to accept land from the king because he thought this might be corrupting. But he got a sign, in the old stories anyway, he got a sign that he was to take this land, and he dedicated it to St. Michael. So he built his monastery there, a small timber church, probably made out of oak planks, and probably thatched roof, and a lot of monks settled down around the monastery along with him. Now I'm going to show you some of the inside of the church as it is nowadays. Some of you I know have seen it probably many times, and maybe other people haven't, so we'll just have a look at the inside of the church as it is today. Actually, this one is the medieval church. So a painting made around the year 1800. This medieval church here was demolished in 1820 and replaced by the present building, and the new church was opened in 1829, designed by Semple, who designed many churches for the Church of Ireland, such as Kiltiernan, and I think Whitechurch. He did quite a lot of churches for Church of Ireland in the 19th century. So this building no longer exists, but I'll show you in a minute. On the tower we have the part of the west wall of this church. So this is the east of the church, the altar and side window here, and the west wall looking west is still holding up the tower, because the tower was built onto the church in the Middle Ages. If you look closely at this, you might see what I mean. So the tower, approximately 500 years old, it was built onto the medieval church, which would have come out to near the gate here. And if you look at this carefully, you'll see there's a shape of a gable. And the stonework in this here is much different to the rest of the tower, because the tower was actually built onto the medieval church, as I say, approximately 500 years ago. The medieval church, we don't have a date for when it was built, probably in the 1300s. But it became too small for the parish, and it got that it was falling apart, so they knocked it down and built the 1829 church on the other side. But when Simple came to this part, he had to leave this wall intact in the wall of the tower, otherwise the tower would have fallen down. So that's the west wall of the medieval church, and this is the doorway into it here. It's been turned into a window. Over on the side here we have St. Maelruain's Losset. I'm going to show you a closer picture of that in a few minutes. Now this is one of the oldest artefacts in the graveyard. It's St. Maelruain's cross. It's what archaeologists term a stumpy-arched cross, and probably goes back to Maelruain's own day. It doesn't mark a grave. It's what's called a támh cross, or a sanctuary cross, which signified that the monastic land was a sanctuary where people could take shelter if they were in trouble with the local authorities or whatever. In the 19th century, people came to the churchyard for a pattern festival. Actually, probably from the medieval period onwards, they came there for a pattern festival. And this was known locally as Maelruain's loaf and griddle. They'd gotten the proper name of Maelruain. So the loaf is actually this piece of stone on the bottom that the cross is set in. And the griddle is an old millstone that the whole thing is set into. So that was one of the stations on the pilgrimage, or on the pattern, when people came to the churchyard. The pattern was banned in 1874. One of the Dominican priests actually prepared it. They said it had become an occasion for all kinds of debauchery, so I'm not too sure. The RIC helped to stop it going forward any further than 1874. That's the losset, and losset is an old Irish word. It means a losset was a bowl made out of wood, approximately this size, that people in the country houses they would knead their bread in the losset. It's L-O-S-A-T in Irish, or L-O-S-S-E-T in English, and that's exactly what it was, a bowl for kneading your bread. Now, the reason this granite trough was called a losset was it was a similar shape. So it's quite large. In fact, in that picture, it'd be much bigger. It'd be twice that size. It's carved out of one big boulder of granite, and it used to hold water. Someone drilled a hole in it to stop the water going stagnant. So that's been there since time immemorial. Nobody knows when it was carved, what its proper purpose was. It wasn't a baptismal font, possibly used for washing pilgrims' feet in the Middle Ages. A lot of pilgrims came to honour the bones of St. Maelruain. Now inside the church, this is the reredos, the back panels of the altar, carved out of oak, dates back way over 100 years. I'll show you a couple of the windows. There are only 2 stained glass windows in it, and they are near the altar area. This is the sower who went out to sow the seed, story from the Gospel. And then opposite that, facing it on the other side, are the angels reaping the harvest at the end of time. So the sower is actually dedicated to a rector who was in charge of the church in the 19th century. And the angels, I don't know if you can read the bottom there, is dedicated to the glory of God and the loving memory of Dorothea, wife of the Reverend Robinson, and also Mary Rebecca, their daughter. So beautiful piece of work. Don't know where these windows came from. They might have come from France or Germany, as there wasn't much stained glass being made in Ireland in the 1820s. Now, St. Maelruain. This was part of a reenactment with Vikings and monks, etc. Probably from close to 20 years ago. And so this man was dressed as Maelruain, and fairly convincing, I suppose, the kind of clothes that monks, that the abbot in particular, might have worn in the olden times. Now, his name, Maelruain. Mael means bald in Irish, well, in modern Irish. Ruan was a saint who lived in the Tipperary area, around Lara, near Nina. And he had a famous monastery in where that village is nowadays, the village of Lara. So, Maelruain was very dedicated to the memory of Ruan. Ruan lived a couple of 100 years before him. And what the Mael means, he took the tonsure, the shaved head, in honour of the saint who he was very fond of, Ruan. So that's where he got his name from, Maelruain. The bald one, you could say, of Ruan. But Ruan founded a monastery in Lara, as I say, and there were other monasteries founded in that village later on by the Dominicans and the Augustinians, etc. Lara had lots of connections with Tallaght. They were both connected with the Cailín Day movement, and Lara was a very wealthy monastery. If you think of it, it was in North Tipperary, where the lands are very, very rich, and so they had plenty of wealth, more than Tallaght had. Now, Tallaght had a famous scriptorium, so sometimes Lara, the monks of Lara, came to Tallaght to get books copied. This is an icon done by a nun, I can't think of her name at the moment, and it's usually on the altar of St. Aengus Church down in Maelruain. Now, it reminds us of a story about Aengus and a student who came to study in Tallaght. And you see the young boy there with him. So Aengus came from the Midlands, and he got such a reputation for holiness and for curing people, etc., that he couldn't get any peace, he couldn't get any time on his own. So he got a bit tired of it all, and he came incognito to Tallaght, and he asked the abbot Maelruain, could he stay, could he join the monastery? Well, Maelruain did not know who he was at this stage, so he set him to work in the fields. And he also gave him a job to look after the corn drying kiln. So the kiln for drying the corn before they could mill it. And that was one of Aengus's duties, to look after that. Now, some students got to know that Aengus was a very learned person. But they didn't let on to Maelruain. Instead of that, they went to him for some extra lessons in their Latin. And this little boy learned his Latin so well from Aengus that when he came to the examinations, he recited far more in Latin than Maelruain required him to do. So Maelruain thought there was something fishy about this. And he demanded of the student that he tell him where he learnt all this great Latin. So he had to tell him about Aengus. And when Maelruain then went to Aengus, he eventually recognised who he was, that he was a great scholar. From that day on, he was set to work in the scriptorium. And many famous books came out of the scriptorium of Tallaght. The Martyrology of Tallaght, a list of saints' names basically in Latin, came from Tallaght. Now, the Martyrology, you will read in quite a few books that St. Maelruain and St. Aengus wrote the Martyrology. But there was no exemplar of a Martyrology came near to Tallaght before 828. And Maelruain died in 792. So Aengus was the one, seemingly, who was responsible for most of the great books that come out of Tallaght scriptorium. He may have had a hand in the Stowe Missal. It's named after a library in England, a library owned by the Duke of Buckinghamshire, and that is held in the Royal Irish Academy. I'll show you pictures of it in a minute. He definitely had a hand in the Martyrology of Tallaght. Then he wasn't happy with having a Latin version of it. He composed an Irish version in verse, and that travelled all around Europe. And the fragments of that Martyrology in Irish, it's called the Fader Aengus, by the way. The fragments of that have been mostly found in European monasteries. Now, I might just read you a little bit from the Fader Aengus. Aengus was a little bit of light. Okay, go up to the screen. Yeah, so Aengus wrote this poem in the Fader about the downfall of paganism. Frank O'Connor did a verse translation of it quite a number of years ago. So I'll just read you a little of it. This is what Aengus wrote. Allil the king is vanished. Vanished is Crochan's fort. Kings to Clonmacnoise come to pay their court. So what he's saying is the old pagan sites have vanished and fallen into disuse. But Clonmacnoise, which is the centre of the church, the kings all come there to pay their court. In quiet Clonmacnoise, about St. Kieran's feet, everlasting choirs raise a concert sweet. Allen, this is the hill of Allen. St. Allen and its lords both are overthrown. Bridget's house is full, far her fame has flown. Navan town, Avon Macha in Armagh, he's referring to, ruins everywhere. Glendalough remains, half a world is there. Ferns is blazing torch, Ferns is great and good, but Beg son of Owen and his proud hosts are dead. He continues on the same vein quite a lot. But as I say, he composed the Fader in verse. And perhaps his reason was that to write everything down on vellum, which was calfskin, you needed a huge amount of wealth to do that. So he composed this in verse, possibly just so people could remember it, they could memorize it. And as I say, it travelled all over Europe then to places where St. Columbanus had gone, to Germany, Austria, Switzerland, all these countries, and fragments of it have been found in various monasteries in Europe. So that's Aengus. He's actually, he's the more prominent saint in a sense, even though the monastery is called after St. Maelruain. We know now a lot more about Aengus. There are a lot more legends written about him. How he was out in the woods one day chopping wood for the monastery and he cut his hand off. And said then, he came along, put the hand back on and healed him. Of course, there are fantastic stories, and a lot of the stories about Aengus too are to do with the animals and nature. So a lot of nature poems written about that time by the monks. Now this is the what's called the Stowe Missal. It's in the Royal Irish Academy. I'm sure some people have probably seen it, but this is one of the illuminated pages from it. And it was written around the year 800. This is a capital P, and it's all written in Latin. So the illumination around the side is actually a cat. And if you look carefully in the cat's tummy, what can you see? Birds. So this is very similar to a page in the Lindisfarne Gospels, if you've heard of that, from Lindisfarne in England. It's very, very similar. There was a lot of influence from Lindisfarne to Ione to Bangor and County down to Tallaght. And that's how the first example of martyrology came to Tallaght, by that route. It's been traced out by scholars according to the saints who are remembered in martyrology. So, as I say, this was a book written around the year 800 in the Tallaght, most likely in the Tallaght scriptorium. We don't know for absolute definite, but it was ordered by the monastery of Laura in Tipperary. They were the ones who paid for it. So it ended up in North Tipperary for quite a lot of its life till it ended. It went to England and was in the library of the Duke of Buckinghamshire. And then it came back to Ireland at the end of the 19th century when that library was bought by the British government. I'll show you a couple of pages. This is a window of St. Ruan. You can see Nave Ruan down here. And that's in the small little Catholic church in Laura, the present day. This is a page that's included in the Stowe Missal, but seemingly doesn't properly belong to it. It's the beginning of the Gospel of John. This one is a genuine page from it, and this is all Latin here. Again, we've Latin over here, but this one is easy enough to make out. For anyone that learned Irish a long time ago, you might have used this S. You see the S there? Sancta. So Sancta Stephan Oro Pro Novus. Everything is abbreviated, so they can fit the whole lot onto one page of vellum. So the monks used a lot of abbreviations. You have Sancta Martin Oro Pro Novus Hieronymus, who is Jerome. Hilary, Patricius, then you have Finmo, St. Finian, St. Kieran, St. Brendan, and St. Columba. St. Columba's in there twice. It might be Columkill and maybe Columbanus. Both in there, I'm not sure. But that's one of the pages from the book. And as I say, it's held in the Royal Irish Academy. They keep it in their vaults most of the time, but if a group organises for it to go and see it, they actually take it up from the vaults and put it in a glass case to be examined. And it's only a small book, like a pocket book, that monks would have taken out with them, a missal for the same mass if they were going out to some other church or out to somebody's home. This is the reliquary, or the kudach of the Stowe Missal, and it was made seemingly at Clonmacnoise a couple of hundred years after the book was written. The artist's name is up here, Dominicans, and so we know that he operated in Clonmacnoise area in the 11th century. And the cross on the top here is a later piece of work. It's from the 14th century with semi-precious jewels, and I think they're quartz, polished quartz stone. Now, the kudach, or shrine box, is made out of wood on silver, or I should say silver on wood. So basically the box is wooden, and then you have this silver down on top. This is the top, and this is the bottom. Now, a lot of interesting artwork on the side panels. So you can see you're looking at the side here. This is the jewel in the centre, up on the top. And what you have here is you have two clergymen, two ecclesiastics. You have an angel in between them, and you have a musician down this side. The musician is playing a lyre, a very, very small harp-like instrument. Then over this side you have a stag, and the stag is being taken down by two hounds. One of them is here, and the other is off the picture. He's over the other side. So a beautiful piece of work, and to say all this artwork made in Clonmacnoise around sometime in the 11th century. Now the Cúdach is very, very important because it protected the book for centuries. And after the Middle Ages, the next reference we have to the book is when it was found in this castle. This is called Knocklyon Castle, and it was the main castle of the O'Kennedy clan in North Tipperary. The O'Kennedys were the lords of Ormond in the Middle Ages, before the Butlers took over that position. It is a magnificent structure. The walls are so thick in it that the stairway actually up to the first floor goes inside the wall. It's a national monument, so you can go and visit. It's about 3 miles outside Nina. And 3 miles outside Laura, and Laura is not all that far from Nina. So all the flowers, the wooden floors inside are all gone, they've all rotted away. Now, why this castle is important in the history of Stowe Missal, the O'Kennedys were dispossessed of most of their lands in the Cromwellian period, and by the time it came to the early 1700s, they lived in a small little house beside the castle. In 1735, when things quietened down, things were more peaceful, John O'Kennedy, who still owned a small amount of land in the area, he decided he would restore the castle. And he sent his workmen in to start the restoration, to put new flooring, etc. into it. In the process, they knocked down the wall in the castle, and inside it they found the shrine box with the book safe inside. So the O'Kennedys called in an Irish scholar from County Clare to examine the book, and he told them exactly what it was. Now it disappears out of history then, till it appears in the library of the Duke of Buckinghamshire in England. That was a huge library, a very, very famous library. The British government bought the whole lot when the Duke died, and then eventually the Irish parts of that library, like the Stowe Missal, were returned to Ireland in the late 19th century. The book went to the Royal Irish Academy, and the shrine box went to the National Museum. It's still in the National Museum, not always on display. You would imagine it should be in the treasury, but it's not. It sometimes appears upstairs in the Viking section for some reason, but not always on display. You'll see it some days. So that's where it was found, in Knocklyon Castle. I should probably connect before I leave Knocklyon Castle. As I say, Knocklyon was about 3 miles from Laura. So the fact that this book had been ordered by Maelruain's monastery in Laura, it all ties in. The book remained in that area for most of its life, and that's how it ended up in the castle. It was probably hidden away in the wall for safekeeping. Now, we'll come back to the history of Tallaght. This is the oldest map we have of Tallaght, made around the year 1643. Now, this shows a castle with some kind of a wall or a ditch around it, and quite a few buildings in the castle. There seemed to be a church within the castle, as well as St. Maelruain's outside. So this is St. Maelruain's in the 1640s. No roof on it. You can see, like we were showing you earlier on, the medieval church attached to the tower. So the tower was actually built onto it as a residence for the priest in a time of warfare when you had lots of skirmishing going on around the Pale area. So no roof on that. We know that Captain Alland, who was a Cromwellian captain, he had stolen the roof to build a house for himself. He later had to pay compensation to a huge extent, £300, which was an enormous amount of money at that time. So he had to pay that back to the church for having stolen the roof. It's said that he also fed his horses in the church and that they drank from the losset. You get lots of old legends like that about that time. The village was nothing like we see it today. You had a few houses scattered about. You had the little stream going through here, which still is to be seen within the Priory grounds, though there's no water in it nowadays. And that joined the Tallaght stream, which is over here on this side of the map. The Tallaght stream is the stream that goes through Shamwash Park nowadays. Its course has been manipulated and diverted in various different directions over the centuries, but in this map it's quite straight. So this part here that we see here will be the part that's flowing alongside the bypass today, up along by Millbrook, you could say. So a few scattered houses, and then another little castle on the outside, which is probably Bancroft Castle, which there's no trace left of. So there's one part of this castle, the main Tallaght castle, which is still left. I'll show you that in a few minutes on the slides. There is a drawing done of the castle long after it disappeared. So this shows the castle as a very elaborate building. Let's see if I can get it a little bit sharper there. Now, whatever the building looked like, it certainly wasn't as pretty and Disneyfied, as you might say, as this picture is. The one part that still exists is this tower at the back, which is within the Priory buildings now. So this is done by the artist's imagination, probably looking at that old map, because this wasn't drawn till 1818, and the castle, most of the castle was knocked down in 1720, except for the tower, which is still there. So the rest of it all disappeared. One of the bishops at that time, Archbishop Holy, he built a palace in place of the castle. And it's a very interesting drawing, this, even though, as I say, part of it is the artist's imagination. You can see Maelruain's church here, and again, the medieval church attached onto the tower. This is the Old Bond Road. This is the Tallaght stream, and you can see pedestrians crossed it, as this woman is doing, on stepping stones at Knocklyon. And if somebody was driving across it, of course, they'd have to drive their horse and cart across a ford, where you'd have flagstones in a shallow part of the river where they could drive across. Where the cows are, approximately where the AIB is today. tower looks the same right through the ages. Very little difference to it. It was built, as I say, to house the priest, and it had a belfry with 2 or 3 little bells up on the top of it, where it has one big bell today. So it's an interesting picture. The Priory, as far as I know, owns the original of that in a painting, in the form of a painting. Now that's the tower as it still is today. It's in the Priory buildings. We can only see one complete wall of it, but all 4 walls exist. They're surrounded by more modern buildings that the Dominicans built. This one was built in 1901. This was built in 1957. The tower itself is documented as having been built by Archbishop de Bignor, a Norman Archbishop, in 1324. In the early 1300s, the citizens of Tallaght had applied to the King of England for what they call a moorage grant. That's a grant for to build a wall around the town for to protect themselves, because they were being attacked constantly by the O'Byrnes and the O'Tooles and the O'Nolans and different families who were out in the countryside and up in the mountains. A lot of the castle was restored. You can see lovely windows that are around it. It was restored by an antiquarian who owned the lands there in the 1830s, Mr. Lentane. So I'll show you some of the inside of the tower now. That's the stairwell. All made out of limestone. You can see the way it was polished. Some of you might know some of the Dominicans who studied there years ago. I've been told they used to run up and down these stairs, and you can see that they held on to the centre piece as they were running up and down, because all the limestone is polished. So are the steps down here. Very nicely carved steps, and quite wide, about almost a metre wide the steps are. So that goes right up to the battlements up at the top, and you have these little windows where the archers could fire out and defend the castle. Now there is a little oratory inside the castle. Used to be the students' oratory when you had a lot of students studying in Tallaght for priesthood, and that was their main house of studies in Ireland. So the Dominicans came there back in 1856. Now, a few things in the garden of the Priory. This stone has 2 depressions in it. It has a hole that goes right through it, and it has a little holy water stoop carved into this side of it. It was the base of the cross of Tallaght. The cross of Tallaght stood more or less where the victor's statue is today, opposite the Dragon Inn. And when people were going to the graveyard to bury somebody, they would go so many times around the cross. One of the archbishops in the late Middle Ages, he regarded this as very superstitious practice, and he ordered his workmen to take the cross apart. And this is the only surviving part of it. It's said that other parts of it were used in the Archbishop's bathhouse, but this part still survives. Now, I asked an archaeologist to look at this, going back, must be 10 or 12 years ago, and he felt the stone here on the top, and it's very, very smooth. So he said this hole here was carved out by the shaft of a horizontal mill. That's a mill that goes around this way instead of a big mill wheel going vertically. The earliest mills that the monks built all around Ireland were horizontal mills. They had paddles going around in the water. So in the centre of those paddles, you would have a shaft, more than likely made out of iron, coming up through here and holding another stone which revolved on the top, and you pour your wheat down into it for it to get ground into flour. The top stone is missing a long time, but the hole is peculiarly shaped, and you'll see reference to it in many books written about Tallaght, that it's a screw-shaped hole, it's a spiral hole, lots of different suggestions, but the archaeologist Con Manning, who came to look at it, he just put his finger on it straight away and said it was carved by the shaft of a horizontal mill. So we know that a mill like that existed in Tallaght way back in the early Middle Ages. There is another stone near that, another picture of it, but it's a bull-on stone, and was used by the monks to grind herbs into medicine. A couple of other things in the garden. There's St. Maelruain's tree, and the oldest part of the tree is the part that's lying on the ground. This is a winter picture, as you can see. It's a walnut tree, and it bears walnuts every year. There were lots of them there a few weeks ago. I think the squirrels eat most of them when you get around to it. The part that's lying on the ground looks from its girt that it was a couple of 100 years old when it fell down. And we know it's documented it actually fell in 1797 in a great storm. So if we go back from that, then 1597 approximately, the tree might have been planted around 1600, maybe around that time. So the tree is actually hundreds of years old. When this part fell down in the great storm, the people in Tallaght who revered it as St. Maelruain's tree, they thought that was the end of it. But all these other branches started to sprout soon enough, and it's still growing and thriving after at least 400 years. So to say it is a walnut tree. Lots of walnuts bears every year. I believe the walnuts are getting very scarce now. You won't be able to get your walnut weird much longer. I'm going to take the walnuts off them. Now, back to the buildings on the site. So actually, the site where the Priory is has had several buildings succeeding one another over the centuries. So when Archbishop Hoadley was appointed as Archbishop of Dublin in the early 1700s, he thought the castle was too decrepit. It was falling apart, down, wasn't fit for living in. So he had the castle pulled down, except for that tower that we saw a few minutes ago, which was built so strongly that he decided to keep it. But with the stones of the castle that he knocked down, he built himself a palace. And the palace, you can see here, built around 1720, and much more comfortable than the castle, though it wasn't any great architectural masterpiece. So this was drawn by Berenger in the early 1700s. Archbishop Hoadley built that to make it a more comfortable residence. There was another archbishop came after him called Archbishop Fowler, and around the year 1750 he built himself a bathhouse. The bathhouse is now what remains of it in the garden in the front of the Priory. So this is right beside Main Street. Main Street is out to the right here. That's the main gate into the Priory. And if you look at the bathhouse carefully, you'll see that there was a culvert and another one on this side. And the stream that we saw on the map from 1643 actually flowed through this. So that was a man-made stream. It was artificial watercourse, which presumably supplied water to the castle in the olden days. The castle would have stood more or less where the Priory Church is nowadays. This big tree, some of you might know, disappeared about 6 months ago. It got to chop. It must have been an alien, and we were afraid it might fall on top of somebody, so all you have is a stump there nowadays. So Archbishop Fowler built this bathhouse. I think the ground level was probably different at that time. He had a door somewhere going into it. He more than likely had a big iron bath somewhere in here, and he'd get his servants to warm the water up. The water came actually from the Tallaght stream. It used to come across the fields and into the Priory grounds near the Dragon Inn. You can still see an archway there beside the centre for the unemployed, and then it flowed into the front garden of the Priory. It also served another purpose besides supplying water to the castle and for Archbishop Fowler's bathhouse. It went on across here, and in this area there's a depression. That was a mill pond, and the mill race ran from that mill pond down a hill, really where the new Greenhills Road is now, going down by New Bancroft there. You can see there's quite a steep hill there, and the mill race ran down there and turned a very small mill wheel in the Archbishop's mill. So all the Archbishop's tenants had to bring their grain to the Archbishop's mill to have it ground. So that parts of that mill were found by archaeologists when that new road was being made down by the Bank of Ireland. So come back to the Dominicans. The Dominicans came to Tallaght in 1856. This is a statue of St. Dominic, which is out in the garden of the Priory. They lived in the castle. They lived in a mansion which stood where the retreat house is now, and actually the mansion is still inside the retreat house, but we can't see it. That mansion was built in 1820, and the monks said mass in a very large barn which was attached to the tower house. We looked at it a while ago, the 1324 tower house. So that's where they said mass, and lived in whatever other buildings were on the site. It took them a while to get a proper convent together, and this beautiful building from here to the corner there opened in 1864. It was designed by J.J. McCarthy, who was a famous architect at the time. He was very fond of building in a neo-Gothic style, and that's kind of the style he applied to that. The other part of it here was built on in 1901, which joined this building up to the church. And the church, the Dominicans built here now. This opened around 1821. I know there's a couple of different dates given for it around that period, but approximately 1881. A very long, narrow church, and it being a monastic church, only the nave, or the western half of it, this half here, was open to the public. The upper part, the chancel area, was just for the Dominicans themselves. Now when it came to the 1960s, it became far too small for the population living in Tallaght. So the Dominicans built an extension on the front here, which increased the capacity of the church big time. And they changed the main door from here around to the other side, facing the main street. So that's it as it is today. The architect, by the way, won an architectural prize for this, for adapting it to the Gothic style of the church. There was also, dividing the church, the public area from the monks area, there was what we call a rood screen, a very elaborate rood screen made out of oak, and there's hardly a trace of it left. It was taken away when the church was modernised in the 1960s, and most of it was broken up and thrown on the dump, which is an awful shame, because it seemingly was great work of art. The only parts of it that remain are, if you go into the church, you'll see on the west wall and over this side, there is the crucifix, which is the rood actually that rood screen refers to. It's an Old English word, rood. So this beautiful oak crucifix and a statue of Mary on one side and St. John on the other. And his brother Michael, who passed away last year, he was the one who rescued that and had it erected again on the wall of the Priory. The rest of it disappeared. Now this is a picture of Tallaght from around the year 1900. And some of the buildings, well actually no, it'll be later than that, because we have the T.J. Bourne buildings up here. They were built in 1910, so around about 1910. Over 100 years old photograph anyway. And up along here we have the tram tracks of the Blessington steam tram, which went right through the village. I have another picture where you actually see one of the trams through the village. So, yeah. So this would have been just after 1910. So these lovely houses in Main Street were built in about 1910. They're Thomas Joseph Bourne buildings, which he built all around the South County. And you can see the steam tram was, this particular version of it was a heavy old thing, chugging up the street there. It's pulling some kind of a carriage, might be a double-decker carriage. Another picture of it here. That one was taken in Blessington. And I don't know if it's the same engine, I don't think so. This one looks more elaborate. And then you have everybody in the picture named down the bottom here. Aidan will be able to tell us more about it. Okay, this is a map of Tallaght from around the beginning of the 20th century. You can see St. Mary's Priory in here. The fosse around the graveyard, which we looked at the beginning. St. Maelruain's cross is mentioned there. The St. Maelruain's church, of course, there at the tower. Main Street down here, and the cottages along the side there. You can see the cottages had quite long gardens. And the gardens, pardon?
Oh no, sorry, I'm just saying oh yes.
Right, Pat, yeah. So this is where the bypass is nowadays. And of course the Tallaght stream, as we see it here, it was very bendy. It's all in a straight line now. Shawmulch Park over this side. This is actually the watercourse I was telling you about. Coming from Watergate, across the fields, into the Priory grounds at the back of the Dragon Inn. And then it takes a bit of a loop there and goes across to where the Archbishop's bathhouse is, across here. And the old mill was somewhere down along here, this area.
What's the date of that?
I don't know exactly, I think it's around 1900. So the place has changed quite a lot. I'm going to finish up with one aerial shot which will cover most of that area you can see there. So this was taken by Leo Swan, some of you might have known him. Leo did a lot of aerial photography.